Hello and welcome to the very first of our Brave Hearts, Bold Minds podcasts, Growing Fine Young Men. I'm Lee Hatcher. Thanks for joining me on this journey into how to help the boys of today grow into the fine young men of tomorrow. Each week, I'll be interviewing an educator from the Scots College in Sydney to uncover very practical tools with which parents of school-age boys can engage, encourage and challenge their sons for wisdom and compassion. So, let's ring the bell and meet our guest for the very first podcast. To kick off our series of wonderful conversations, the principal of the Scots College, Dr Ian Lambert, to explain what it's all about. Dr Lambert, thank you so much for kicking our podcast series off.
Thanks very much, Lee. It's lovely to be here.
It's great to be with you. Tell us where, how and why the idea of Brave Hearts, Bold Minds and Growing Fine Young Men first emerged. Ian?
I think one of the things we tried to achieve here was to get to the core, to get the essence of both the school and also the young men that we're seeking to educate. And clearly we recognise that being a non-selective, comprehensive school, that we have boys of all sorts of abilities. They come to us from quite a diverse range of backgrounds, and we need something that focuses them and focuses us as a teaching staff. And we recognise when we talk about education in the 21st century, we're often talking about academic education. We're thinking about the life of the mind. But schools like this have always very traditionally been involved in the life of the heart or the character, the values, the inspiration, motivation. And I think in the 21st century, when these boys are my age and older, they will be wrestling with a world that's going to take enormous courage and insight and influence and all those human qualities that complement a very bright, intelligent, curious person. So the Brave Hearts, Bold Minds came around with that concept in mind, and it plays upon our Scottish heritage of we brave hearts and you know, a lot of things that the boys rally around.
Yeah. In practical terms, you say there are 4 things that are important in the education of a boy at school and in life. I want to take you briefly through each one and get you to address it for us. First, habit of work.
I think habit of work is a very, very important thing for young boys to learn, that effort trumps ability all day long, that we all know people and friends who have significant IQs or intelligence, have done well at the university, but in the effort capacity, they just don't have the drive and determination to push through. One of the very symbolic things here in the school that people have tried to get me to change is that our boys wear long sleeve shirts, but we make them roll them up. So the rolled up sleeve is a symbol of, in Australia, of getting down and doing the hard work.
Yeah.
And we push that. Not everyone can be the next brain surgeon, but they can all be trusted and hard workers. So I think work ethic is something that's very important to us.
And that's good for the character of the boy.
I think absolutely. The ability to be able to persist over time through good, honest application is something that every young man and every young girl, in fact, needs to learn at an early age.
Second thing that will grow fine young men is a habit of reading. It's an interesting one in this day and age. A challenge in a digital world and where there are myriad numbers of images. How do you go about doing that, and why is it important?
I think reading is something that's undervalued a lot in the era of the image, where we look at things and we perceive and learn through visual texts. But reading, you know, the brain, we know from brain research that when you're reading, you're mentally processing information, you're creating your own images in your head, and you're applying and interpreting the story through your own experiences and insights. So that it's a much more complex process that you're going through when you're reading, and there is, you know, the great knowledge of the world up until this point exists in books and exists in people as well. But we have a record in books that we need, you know, to make sure that this new generation doesn't forget and doesn't fall into the trap of believing they're recreating the world for the first time.
But how can you kind of turn off the devices and distract them from those images and sit down?
Look, I think you do it through structure. We live in a very unstructured world, and that every technology breaks down the barriers, but that doesn't mean that time and structure is not important. So in the very early years in the preparatory school or the primary years here that they have reading time. They must get a book. They will carry books around. They must read a certain number of books a week. And in fact, it becomes a little bit competitive where they start to feel very proud of the fact that they've knocked off 2 books a week.
Yep.
We also have experiences in our Glengarry or our outdoor education campus where there is no technology. They go to bed and there's a reading time before they go to sleep and they read books.
Remember those days?
You remember those books? And so in some ways, the boys are quite fascinated, because they haven't done it before. And I think that's a sad reflection on the world that we don't create time and space and structure to sit boys down and take their computers away and take their phones away and help them to see the world through a different lens.
Maybe we're old school, but I say what a gift. What a gift.
Yeah, there were some good things in the old school, I think, that we need to carry forward.
The third aspect is something maybe outside school, which is interesting, developing hobbies and interests.
One of the things that you struggle with in a school is, when you and I went through school, that there were certain careers and pathways that most of our friends, dads and mums were involved in. And it was a pretty simple world in some ways. But now for the students, I think they're confronted with so many options and so many options that haven't even been discovered yet. It's almost debilitating.
Yes.
So I think the most important thing you can do as a young person is to, develop an understanding, a belief in what it is you're good at and what others say you're good at. And sometimes you'll find that in a maths class or an English class. Sometimes you'll find it making, model aeroplanes or learning to fly a drone or being a sailor and in those sorts of areas. So I think there's a whole lot of life skills and communities that you connect in by being involved in hobbies and community service activities. So I think that's part of the reason. It's just another layer of, helping boys to unfold themselves over time.
One of the things I wanted to do in this podcast is try to lift the veil on the life of Dr Ian Lambert.
Yeah.
Hobbies and interests of yours?
Yeah, look, I've always...
in your busy life?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? As you get older, you tend to think you become less and less skillful, but do more and more. Maybe that's what's wrong with the world.
Yeah.
Funny, I grew up as a farm kid and, we grew up with cattle properties in southern New South Wales, northern New South Wales, but we always had farms that were close to the beach. So I'm also a surfboard rider and I continue surfing.
That's impressive.
To this day, that's my number one. I have to stay fit.
Yes.
But I think the surf is one of those places that they can't reach me on a mobile phone, which is good.
Not yet.
And it's beautiful being in a natural environment and enjoying it. So I love that. I play music. I play saxophone and a little bit of keyboard as well. So I'm probably a long way from where I was, but...
Still fairly rounded, though.
I still try to pick it up and play occasionally and stay interested. But, generally love life, really. I'm sort of enthusiastic and curious and like doing lots of different things. Final
key to unlocking a boy's potential is to develop compassion and sensitivity. In other words, to care for others. A very significant issue for you.
I think with Scots having, very strong, clear values that come out of its Christian foundations, I think that notion of serving others, of looking out for others, is fundamental to who we believe the young person should be and should become. And you learn that through practicing. I think sometimes in a world that's focusing very much on self and getting ahead yourself, you need to be other-centred, and you do that by caring for people. And I've always been very committed that, some of your greatest teachers are the people who can be less fortunate, and you think you're giving something to them, but in fact you're taking a lot away. And I think if you learn that at a young age, then you'll be someone who'll contribute to society, not just take from it.
That's a challenge for boys who are privileged and who have many gifts, both personally and gifts handed to them.
Yep.
How do you go about opening their mind and their life to those less fortunate than themselves?
Well, I think it's a constant message, and I hope by the time I'm, put in a box in the ground that they'll remember a few things, and that is that you often end up where you are in life, and you can only do what you can do in that space of time and in that community. But if you are given more, then you have a greater opportunity to influence others, and that your circle of influence can expand. If you've been well educated, if you happen to have resources that your parents can support you with, then you can do more for people with less. And I think, great leaders of the world, the William Wilberforces, the Abraham Lincolns, they were out there not necessarily for themselves, but for the change to society, the change in people's lives. And I think fundamentally I can justify being in a school like Scots with the resources that have accumulated over 125 years, because I believe that some of the young men that will emerge from this college will be captains of industry and political leaders and leaders in medical fields, and I hope that when they're doing that for others.
You say your goal may be somewhat surprising for people who look from the outside in to all these robust young men. Your goal is sincere love and respect.
I think everyone wants to know a good man. Everyone wants to be connected through friendship, through love, having a father or someone who is a good man. And I think we're living in a time where we elevate the athlete and, that strong physical male or the soldier. And sometimes we don't give the good press to the kind, generous young men. And I don't think there's a conflict between strength of character and kindness and love. I think a really strong person is able, through their actions and through their affections, to reach out to others and care. So I think we need to talk about that through the education of young men. They need to learn to express themselves in those ways and feel very comfortable about that.
So it might seem to me that you're out to develop the perfect young man. Tell me, does that happen here?
I think, we wish. I think my wife would say, I wish you would, live by your mantra. But I think, with anything in life, you set kind of audacious goals, and we know that perfection's really not possible. But if you set a high standard and you put the scaffolding in place, then we'll get closer to that goal. And I hope that many of the young men who have experienced this type of educational program will get closer and closer to being recognised by others as genuinely good, faithful, trustworthy, caring and inspirational young men.
What a world that would be.
Yeah, what a world.
Fantastic. Yeah. As we wrap up our great introductory conversation to our podcast, I want to delve into the perhaps unknown life of Dr Ian Lambert and your own education as a young man. This is where I want you to lift the veil again. Tell me one thing that worked for you in your education, where this took place, and also one thing that didn't.
Yeah, that's a good question. I grew up in small country public schools, and probably through my brother's great intelligence, rode on his coattails as he got a scholarship to a wonderful boys' school in Queensland. And the thing that worked for me was moving into an environment where you could flourish in a wide range of areas that you didn't, if you weren't the strongest academic, that didn't matter. You could actually excel in sport or music or cadets or whatever program it was.
Yes.
And that the educational program was constantly growing in front of you, and there was a sense of you were exploring with the school as it was growing. So I think that works for me as a person. I think it works for boys. Boys always want to be on the frontier. So I think if a school is static, then it quickly gets boring.
Yeah.
So my challenge as a leader is to keep it moving and then keep encouraging the boys to move with it. So I think that worked for me, that adventurous, kind of curious world that was in front of me as a young 12, 13, 14-year-old.
Great stuff. What didn't work for you?
Yeah, what didn't work for me is an interesting one. I think at the time I probably didn't maximise my academic potential at school. I think in a couple of subjects I did. I topped art and English and geography, but probably wasn't as strong in the sciences at the time. And I think largely that was just a lack of practical application. I'm a great advocate of experiential learning, where learning is contextualised in an environment. And for me, the sciences and the maths were probably not contextualised in a way that I found helpful. And by the time I started to work it out, I'd probably missed the bus.
It's a good lesson for educators.
Good lesson, that's right. Yeah.
Tell me finally, do you like your job?
Oh, look, there are days when I absolutely think this is the greatest job in the world, and many days like that, and partly because of the opportunity to support and influence others and to see outstanding young men graduate and appreciate what you've given. And there are days when it's tough. It's like running a small country, and you can't please everyone all the time, but you have to just stay very focused to your vision and your values and be authentic and have integrity. And I try and do that best way I can. But there are days when you doubt and you wonder whether you've got it right. But I think that's where the integrity comes in. If you don't get it right, you own up, and hopefully you've got a strong enough team around you that they'll forgive you and let you move on with them.
That's a good point. Yes, Dr. Ian Lambert, thank you so much for a great conversation kicking off what is going to be a fantastic series of podcasts.
No,
thanks indeed.
Thank you, Lee.
If you'd like more information about growing your boy into a fine young man, you can subscribe to receive really useful articles and news from the Scots College. It's free and offered to every parent who wants the very best for their boy in their journey to manhood. In your internet search engine, enter the Scots College e-newsletter to subscribe. I'm Lee Hatcher. I hope you'll join me again next week on the Brave Hearts, Bold Minds podcast, Growing Fine Young Men. Ian, one more question. When was the last time you rang a school bell? I've got a purpose for asking this.
Probably Ulladulla Public School and primary school is the last time I probably rang the school bell.
It's about time you did it again. Will you please ring us out?
I will.
Press that button.
I'll press that button.